Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into how historical stories get told, especially when they intersect with politics. We're looking at a specific document today. It's titled Excerpts from Historical Triggers of the Democratic Party. And our goal here, like always, is to carefully unpack the claims made in this source. We want to explore not just what it's saying, but how it tries to connect things past events to present reactions. Just to be clear, this is going to be an impartial look at the document's content, guiding you through its specific viewpoint.
That's right. And it's really important to go into this knowing that this document offers a very particular perspective, a specific lens on history and politics. Our aim isn't to endorse anything, but simply to understand the narrative this source presents. We want to give you insights into its perspective, how it builds its case.
Okay, let's dive in then. This document, it really doesn't waste any time getting your attention. It opens with what it calls a bold and provocative idea. It states, and I'm quoting here, if Democrats are losing their minds over something, it's probably really good for the country.
Wow, that's quite an opening line. From an analysis standpoint, what kind of impact is the source likely aiming for with a statement like that right at the beginning?
Well, it's incredibly direct, isn't it? That kind of immediate provocative statement really frames everything else that follows. It sets a very, very clear, argumentative tone from the outset. It basically tells the reader, look, the history I'm about to show you, it's all evidence for this idea. So it's defining its terms, what it sees as triggers for the Democratic Party right from sentence one.
Okay, so that's the setup. Where does the source go first for its historical proof? It jumps straight to the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, just a quick reminder for everyone, this was Lincoln's 1863 order during the Civil War, freeing enslaved people in the Confederate States. A huge turning point. And the source claims Democrats fought a war to keep their slaves, and that this proclamation really ticked them off.
Right. And what's interesting about the source's method here is how it immediately grabs such a major historical event, the Emancipation Proclamation, no less. It uses it right away to back up its opening premise about these so-called triggers. It's trying to establish a kind of foundational historical pattern from the get-go, linking this huge national moment directly to its core argument about party reactions.
Okay, so from the Emancipation Proclamation, the document then quickly shifts to another key post-Civil War moment, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This was the act Congress passed to give citizenship and equal rights to African Americans after the war. And the document states that Democrats were not happy when Republicans gave their former slaves civil rights.
Exactly. And this detail, presented this way in the source, links directly into the theme it's constructing. According to this document, it's portraying a consistent pattern of opposition to rights for formerly enslaved people. It connects it back to that initial idea of what triggers the party. It seems to be building its case, step by step.
Right, building a narrative. So if it's creating this picture of continuous opposition, where does it look next in its historical scan?
Yeah.
It brings up anti-lynching laws next as another point of friction. The source just puts it plainly. Democrats really didn't like this one either.
Precisely. And this, in the context of the source's argument, is presented as just more evidence for the historical pattern it wants to establish. It's stringing together these different legislative efforts around civil rights and protections and tying them to what it claims is a historical opposition from the Democratic Party, creating a thread, you see, through different time periods.
Okay, now let's fast forward quite a bit, nearly a century, to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This was obviously a landmark piece of legislation. It outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It effectively ended the whole era of Jim Crow laws. Just for context, Jim Crow laws were those state and local rules, mainly in the South, that enforced segregation and kept black people from voting. So the source points out that the 1964 Act meant no more Jim Crow laws. And then it adds this specific detail, asserting that every Democrat governor signed off on those original Jim Crow laws.
And what's really, fascinating about the source's argument here is that direct historical link it's drawing, it's connecting the party, which it claims signed off on Jim Crow, directly to the legislation that eventually ended Jim Crow. It's aiming to create a really distinct cause and effect line in its narrative. It reinforces that central thesis about the party's historical reactions to certain big societal changes. It's quite a powerful rhetorical move, really, drawing a seemingly straight line through complex history to make its point about current positions.
Right. And then the document makes a shift, moving to a much more contemporary example. It says this is to bring the whole narrative full circle. It makes a specific claim that Democrats were actually out protesting ICE because ICE were rescuing 10 children who were trafficked and were engaged in slave labor on a California pot farm.
Just to clarify, ICE is U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the federal agency handling immigration laws.
And the source wraps this part up by stating very explicitly, quote, "It's like we come full circle."
Yes, and that phrase full circle is really the key part there. The source uses it deliberately to tie this modern event right back into its larger historical argument. It makes a very direct, quite striking link. It even says, way back to slavery, folks, basically. It's trying to connect current events, like the mass deportations it mentions in this context, directly to those alleged historical triggers it outlined earlier. It's making a very, very strong, very explicit connection between past and present, which, is often a feature of documents that are trying to make one very clear, persuasive argument.
So, okay, we've walked through the source's main points. What does all of this mean for you, the listener? Well, this deep dive is really about encouraging you to think about how a particular source, like this one, chooses to interpret history, how it connects events, how it builds a specific story to explain modern political reactions. It's about seeing how an argument is constructed.
It really is. And it underscores how important it is to be aware of the different narratives out there. When you come across documents like this one, sources that make these really strong claims about history repeating itself or about direct lines from past to present, it's a good prompt to critically examine those connections, to ask yourself, okay, what story is this source really telling me, and what effect is it trying to achieve?
And that really brings us to the end of our deep dive into these excerpts from Historical Triggers of the Democratic Party. It's quite a stark example of how historical narratives can be put together to frame political viewpoints, how a document can draw these very direct lines from past events to current situations to make a specific point stick.
Yeah, and it leaves us with a pretty important question for you to think about, doesn't it? When you encounter arguments in documents or elsewhere that draw that kind of direct line from historical events right up to today's political stances, especially when they use phrases like coming full circle, how do you evaluate those connections they're asserting? And maybe, just as importantly, what might that particular telling of this story be leaving out?